Have you ever stood at the edge of a thought so vast, so luminous, that the ordinary architecture of your mind simply could not contain it, and in that trembling instant wondered whether you were losing yourself or finally, irrevocably, finding yourself? There is something happening in the human experience that our language has always struggled to name. It is not madness, and it is not transcendence in any simple religious sense. It is something far stranger, far more intimate, and far more consequential. It is the suspicion ancient, recurring, felt in the bones before it is ever reasoned in the mind that the world we walk through every waking hour is not the world as it actually is, but a kind of magnificent abbreviation, a condensation, a story we have agreed, without quite knowing it, to tell ourselves about a reality whose true depth would shatter every category we have ever built to make sense of being alive. The body knows this before the intellect does. You have felt it. In those moments when emotion rises so suddenly and so completely that thought falls silent, when grief arrives like weather, when joy becomes almost unbearable, when fear wakes you at 3 a.m. with a certainty that something is terribly wrong, though nothing in the visible world has changed in those moments, the body is telling you the truth. It is saying you are not separate from the field of things. You are not an observer behind glass, coolly watching existence scroll past. You are inside it. You are made of it. And it is made in some unfathomable and beautiful way of you. The mind and the body are not two things in conversation. They are one thing speaking in two voices simultaneously, and neither voice is ever entirely wrong. The thought you think at noon becomes the tightness in your chest by evening. The grief you swallowed years ago becomes the weight you carry without knowing why. And the wonder, the genuine, open-palmed wonder that you allow yourself in rare and unguarded moments becomes, mysteriously, a lightness in the body, a softening at the edges of perception, as though the world itself responds to your willingness to be moved by it. Now, I want to speak to you about something that has been, in the modern world, simultaneously the most feared and the most misunderstood of all territories of human experience. I want to speak about those substances, plants and molecules that have accompanied the human species across tens of thousands of years of its journey, substances that indigenous cultures around the world have called medicines, teachers, sacred doors, and that the Western scientific tradition has spent the last half-century trying to categorize, to suppress, and in recent decades, to rediscover with something approaching astonishment. These compounds, and I speak of them not as an invitation to recklessness, but as a philosopher gestures at a landscape, these compounds do something to human consciousness that no other class of experience quite replicates. They dissolve the boundary, that invisible but immensely powerful partition between the self and the world, between the perceiver and the perceived, between the thought and the thinker it becomes, under their influence, suddenly, breathtakingly permeable. And what floods in through that permeability is not chaos, as the frightened gatekeepers of ordinary reality have always insisted, but something closer to information. Raw, unfiltered, overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful information about the nature of what is actually happening in the vast computational space we call existence. People who have navigated these territories with care and with intention report, and they report it across centuries, across cultures, across every conceivable variety of human temperament, that the experience does not feel like hallucination in the pejorative sense, as though the mind were simply misfiring and producing nonsense. It feels, with a force that no subsequent rational argument quite manages to diminish, like contact, like arriving, briefly, at a layer of reality that is ordinarily hidden behind the scrim of ordinary cognition, like suddenly being able to see the wiring behind the wallpaper of the world. And what is that wiring made of? Language, some say. Pattern, say others. Meaning so dense and so alive that it seems to pour from every surface, every geometrical recursion, every fold of sensation, as though the universe were not merely a physical process, but an ongoing act of communication addressed personally and intimately to whoever is present enough to receive it. The philosopher in us wants to ask, communication from whom? And perhaps that is the wrong question. Perhaps the more useful question is, what happens to a human being who genuinely receives that communication, even once? What happens to their sense of who they are? What happens to their relationship with their own fear, their own mortality, their own peculiar and irreplaceable existence? This brings us to something I find endlessly fascinating, the question of time. Not time as the clock measures it, not the linear procession of seconds into minutes, into hours, into years that we use to organize appointments and mark anniversaries, but time is a dimension of experience. Time as the medium through which consciousness moves, or perhaps as the thing that consciousness itself produces in the act of moving through it. There is a model, a strange, poetic, deeply intuitive model that proposes something radical about the shape of time. It suggests that history is not a straight line extending uniformly into an open and indeterminate future, but something more like a wave of increasing complexity and novelty, of events compressing toward one another with greater and greater urgency, as though existence itself were moving toward some kind of resolution, some kind of encounter with itself that has always been implicit in its unfolding. The wave is not a prediction of specific events. It is a map of the texture of time, a description of when the universe tends to surprise itself. What this model points to, whatever one makes of its specific mathematical claims, is something that resonates deeply with lived experience. Does it not feel, particularly now, in this accelerating and disorienting moment of history, as though events are arriving faster than our frameworks for understanding them? As though the distance between ordinary and extraordinary has collapsed, and we are living through a kind of permanent threshold, a continuous hinge moment in which everything old is dissolving and everything new has not yet quite solidified into form. The model says this is not an accident. It says this is the shape of time itself approaching something, a strange attractor pulling the whole adventure of consciousness toward an encounter that we cannot name but that we feel approaching, the way animals feel weather before it arrives. And here is what I want you to hold alongside that. You are not a passive observer of this process. You never were. The assumption that the self is a small, fragile, essentially powerless thing sitting inside a vast and indifferent machine is perhaps the most costly error the modern mind has ever made. Because what the most profound experiences of altered consciousness reveal, and what the quietest moments of meditation, of genuine prayer, of deep grief, of overwhelming love also reveal, in their own register, is that consciousness is not a product of the world. It is not secreted by the brain the way bile is secreted by the liver. It is something older and stranger and more fundamental than any single nervous system. You are a localized expression of something that pervades everything, a temporary intensification, a knot in the fabric that has learned to look at itself and ask why it exists. This is not a mystical claim designed to comfort you with pretty words. This is an invitation to take seriously what the deepest parts of your own experience have always been trying to tell you. That the emotions you feel are not noise. That the longing you carry for meaning, for connection, for some assurance that your brief and unlikely existence matters, is not a pathology to be medicated into silence. It is a signal. It is the universe becoming aware of itself through you and reaching through you towards something that it cannot reach alone. Self-awareness is the beginning of everything. Not self-consciousness in the anxious, contracted sense, not the clenching, judging, comparing mind that narrates your failures in the small hours of the morning, but genuine self-awareness, the willingness to look at what is actually happening inside you, without flinching and without falsifying, to notice that beneath the surface anxiety, there is often grief, that beneath the grief, there is often love, that beneath the love, there is often a terror of loss, so profound that it has shaped your entire life without ever once being named. To see these layers clearly, with compassion rather than judgment, is not weakness. It is the beginning of real power, the kind of power that does not need to dominate anything because it no longer needs to be afraid. Your healing, your growth, your expanding capacity to feel and to think and to connect, these are not private projects. They ripple outward. The person who does the work of becoming more conscious, more compassionate, more genuinely present in their own life changes the field. They change what is possible in every conversation they enter, every relationship they inhabit, every room they walk into. This is not a metaphor. This is the mechanics of how consciousness propagates through a species. One person's genuine transformation is a gift offered to everyone they will ever touch. The limits of consciousness are not fixed walls. They are more like the surface of water, apparent boundaries that yield to sufficient pressure, sufficient curiosity, sufficient courage. Every genuine seeker, in every tradition, has discovered this. The boundary between what you think you are and what you actually are is negotiable. And the negotiation happens not in some distant future, not after some prescribed amount of suffering or some achievement of worthiness, but now, in the quality of attention you bring to this moment, in the willingness to feel what you are actually feeling rather than what you think you should be feeling, in the radical and quietly revolutionary act of treating your own interior life as something worth exploring. There is a community gathering at this extraordinary moment in history of people who understand that the journey inward and the journey outward are not different journeys. People who know that taking care of their own psychological and emotional health is not a luxury, but a form of activism. People who are willing to ask the hard questions about the nature of mind, about the relationship between consciousness and matter, about what it means to live well in a world that is changing faster than any of us can fully comprehend, and to sit with those questions with curiosity rather than panic. If something in what you have heard today has found you, not merely amused you, not merely interested you, but found you in the way that only truth can find a person, then you are already part of this community. What I ask of you is simple, and it is not nothing. Stay close, subscribe, return. Not because I have all the answers nobody does, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something far less interesting than the mystery itself, but because the conversation matters, because you matter, because the questions you are asking, even the ones you have not yet found words for, are exactly the questions that this moment in history most urgently needs human beings to ask. The waves are rising. The novelty is accelerating. And you, with your particular history, your particular wounds, your particular and unrepeatable way of perceiving the light, you are not incidental to what is unfolding. You are part of it. you always were. Welcome back to yourself. Welcome to the conversation. The door has always been open, and the universe, in all its terrible beauty, has been waiting patiently, tenderly, with a patience that spans geological time for you to walk through it.